On a cool fall morning in early November, Fire, with her head held high, walked into Mr. Martyr's class, gleaming to give him her story she had worked so hard on. Though, to her surprise, he sat down and read it. With his blue pen he marked it, then passed it on to a peer, and again with surprise, as that peer sat down and read it, and marked it up and down with a red pen. The gleam in Fire's face began to fade. Having the story handed back to her, all marked up with corrections, is where this journey truly begins. Fire took it as a challenge, as a leap to improve. She ran home and sat down, ready for the new. She read over both sets of comments, most repeating each other. Knowing exactly what she had to do, she made an organizer. Before she could rewrite, she must revisit her story mediated by music. Oh, how this story taught her of her mystical and fictional creative style. It all keys into a deeper meaning throughout the end, enjoying how she could reread her story, but only after the exercise was over, feeling challenged by having to write fast enough to keep up with the flow. However, it assisted her in future writing by giving her another creative way to generate ideas, such as the ones that will be added into her newly improved short story. Fire then set out to understand her areas of need. With a new colored pen in hand, a T-chart already made, Fire scribbles down all the comments that were previously made. My strengths are my good identification of characters, and the way I perceived this interesting journey, she lists. However, my weaknesses must learn to be to stay in a single tense throughout the story, to mind the gaps in my logic and reasoning, and watch out for my spelling and grammar. As Fire wrote all this down, it became clear. Her next step was indeed to identify where in the story needed aid and work on from there. There were no areas of feedback that truly surprised her. She quite frankly agreed with all the work. However, before Fire did not understand the structure. Though now Fire knows she must make a new line and indent each time a new person begins to speak. Her global errors are her spelling and grammar. As she looks at page 3, she sees markings. Write out the number 3, it says. Watch for the different meanings of words, another says, as she had written THERW instead of THROUGH for through. Next, she looks at the overall story, realizing she needs to pick a specific part and analyze and rewrite. Oh, how there was nothing better than the mix-up on page 6, where it is indicated that both editors were confused. The main character had forgotten about something so important to her that just magically appears in the end of the story. Oh, how Fire realizes how silly she was now. She sits down with her pens and begins to reconfigure. The reason for this was the lapse in times. After the journal was taken, the story indicated to move forward a few months in time. When the main character has received her journal back, as Fire reconfigures, the indication of the time lapse with asterisks between the scenes, and has the police officer give a clear description of where they had found the journal. It is clear now that as this is mostly a story within the main character's head, due to the friendship the journal is forgotten about, and only brought back up in the end of the book to validate her schizophrenia. Fire then reviewed the gaps that were indicated in the feedback through her logic and reasoning. Later, using the strategies of having herself and others read over the story to fill in where the gaps are and how to create a better flow by filling them in. Now, oh, how Fire was so pleased with her work, though she still had plenty to do. As she took to reviewing the changes, she began to gleam again. Oh, how the strategy she selected worked for her. It just helped the story flow better, and mending the gaps and fixing the spelling and grammar. She went about improving her work by starting off with the specifically identified mistakes first, then let the new transitions flow throughout the rest of the story, which would make everything match up. Lastly, Fire realized how happy she'd become with her polished version, due to how clean it was, how it was so properly written, which makes it easier for the reader to follow and understand the journey through an ill mind. Oh, how the gleam rose to her face once again, as all the changes were made and her happiness spiked up. Hip hip hooray, she seemed to cheer, as she printed the final copy, eager for it to be shared.